welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is, well, it's a tough one. We're doing a rigorous examination of a really chilling case, that of Marc Patrick O'Leary. And this story is just crucial, not just for the sheer brutality across Washington and Colorado, but for the lesson it offers. You know, what happens when meticulous criminal planning gets sabotaged by the guy's own psychology?
That tension is absolutely it. It's the core paradox here. O'Leary was, highly trained, very organized. He went to, frankly, extraordinary lengths to make sure no physical evidence was left. Obsessed with it.
Forensic countermeasures.
Right,
Yes.
exactly. Yet, he ends up completely destroyed by the digital footprint he created. And why? Solely for his own gratification. It's quite something.
So we've got a pretty comprehensive stack of sources for this deep dive. They track O'Leary from his time as a U.S. Army veteran right through to becoming this serial predator between 2008 and 2011.
Yeah, and they detail the precise choreography of his modus operandi, his MO. We're going to really break that down because it's key.
And critically, the sources lay bare the catastrophic system failure in Washington. It's such a stark contrast to the successful evidence-led collaborative investigation that eventually happened in Colorado.
Before we really jump into the timeline and the details, let's just frame that central conflict right away for you, the listener. O'Leary was what criminologists call an organized offender.
Meaning he planned everything meticulously.
Right, like forcing victims to shower, wash, trying to eliminate DNA. That's rational, calculated criminal thinking. But his signature, the thing that really defined him, was this irrational compulsion.
The pink Carol.
The pink Sony digital camera, yeah. Photographing victims, hoarding those images. So the logical effort to erase the physical evidence, completely undone, totally nullified by this powerful psychological need for digital trophies.
That behavioral residue, not the physical stuff he tried so hard to clean up.
Exactly. That became the key.
Okay, so to really get a handle on the precision of his attacks, we have to look at where that discipline came from. Let's get into Section 1, the offender profile. His military background seems absolutely central here.
It really is. O'Leary was a U.S. Army veteran. He was stationed at Joint Base Lewis McChord, or JBLM, up in Washington State, served actively from November 2006 right through to September 2009.
And that timing is critical, isn't it?
It's essential. His time at JBLM wasn't just incidental background. It was foundational to his early crimes. His first known assaults, the ones in Linwood and Kirkland, Washington, they happened while he was actively serving there.
Wow.
And then when he gets orders and relocates down to Jefferson County, Colorado in late 2009, the attacks in Washington stop dead.
And almost immediately.
The pattern reappears right there in the Denver metro area. It's a direct geographic shift following his military transfer.
And he wasn't shy about connecting the dots himself, was he? He actually admitted it.
He did. He told investigators straight up that his criminal methods were a conscious application of his military training. He used that discipline, and I'm quoting here, to figure out a way to stalk his victims, to not be caught and satisfy this urge.
So it wasn't just like skills he happened to have, it was deliberate weaponization.
Absolutely. Active, deliberate weaponization of professional training. Think reconnaissance, operational planning, maintaining extreme discipline under immense pressure. He repurposed all of it for predation.
Which obviously made him incredibly dangerous. Way more efficient than maybe he would have been otherwise.
Dramatically so. It turned him from, maybe just a dangerous person into a highly efficient, disciplined predator capable of really complex long-term planning. But this created a kind of cognitive problem for him.
How do you mean?
Well, how do you reconcile being an American soldier, sworn to protect, or later just a regular civilian, with being a serial rapist? He needed a framework. A justification.
Right, and this is where his self-professed ideology comes into play. He cooked up this whole structure, didn't he? This idea that the world is split into alphas and bravos.
Yeah, and surprise, surprise, he positioned himself as a superior alpha. And in his mind, that supposedly granted him the right to have sexual intercourse with whomever he wanted. It sounds, frankly, like textbook self-justification.
It does, trying to rationalize the horrific acts.
It's a classic example of severe cognitive distortion. Offenders use it to sustain their behavior. It lets them dehumanize victims, frame their actions as some kind of entitlement rather than, brutal abuse. It's a mechanism to feel superior while doing deeply shameful things.
And yet publicly, he tried to push this other narrative, didn't he? The monster narrative. Like he couldn't help himself.
Exactly. He claimed his actions were driven by some internal, uncontrollable pendulum. He even declared in court, "I am a sexually violent predator and I am out of control." He really leaned into that image of pathology.
But the evidence just doesn't back that up at all. This performance of being pathologically compelled, out of control.
It's instantly contradicted, just completely blown apart by the documented evidence. We're talking meticulous long-term planning, weeks, maybe months, of surveillance, executing covert test runs inside victims' homes to learn the layout, check schedules.
That is the absolute opposite of an impulsive, out-of-control crime.
Precisely. The level of preparation suggests calculated impression management. He wanted to seem mad, maybe hoping for leniency or just to fit a narrative. But the reality, he was terrifyingly strategic, methodical.
And that strategy, the end goal, it wasn't even just about physical dominance, according to him. He told investigators power and control were just a means to an end.
Right. So if control was the means, what was the ultimate gratification he was seeking?
Fear.
Exactly, fear.
Yeah.
He explicitly told an investigator, what turned me on is fear. And this is such a crucial distinction in his criminal psychology, his criminology.
How so?
Well, if the goal was just physical gratification, or even just establishing control quickly, the assaults could have been fast. Violent, but fast.
But they weren't. They were prolonged, hours long.
Because his gratification came from the victim's sustained terror. He needed to draw it out, maximize it, extend the fear for as long as possible. That admission directly explains the multi-hour duration of these horrific attacks. The time itself was part of the weapon.
Okay, so that drive for fear, coupled with his need to stay hidden, directly shaped his strategy. Which brings us to Section 2, the timeline of predation. He very deliberately chose to attack in different towns, different jurisdictions.
Yes. Linwood and Kirkland up in Washington first. Then, down in Colorado, it was Aurora, Lakewood, Westminster, Golden, separate municipalities.
And that wasn't random, that was a tactic, right?
Oh, absolutely. A classic informed tactic used by serial offenders, especially those aware of jurisdictional boundaries. He was exploiting the, let's be honest, historical inefficiency of communication and data sharing between separate local police departments.
Betting that no single department would connect the dots quickly.
Exactly. He figured if he spread the crimes out geographically, each police force would likely see their case as an isolated incident, or maybe connect it to local patterns, but not necessarily to crimes happening miles away in another town. It bought him time and reduced the immediate risk of a big, centralized investigation focused squarely on him.
And for a while, it worked. It absolutely worked. Let's walk through that timeline, starting back in Washington State in 2008.
Okay. The first known attack, the one that really set the pattern, was in August 2008 in Linwood, Washington. The victim, whose sources identify as Marie, was just 18 years old. She was living in transitional housing at the time.
And how did he get in? How did it unfold?
He gained entry through an open window, typical opportunistic entry. And once inside, he established absolute control very quickly. He bound and gagged her, chillingly, using her own shoelaces as restraints.
And the duration, that connects right back to the fear motivation.
It does. Marie was repeatedly raped at knife point. The ordeal wasn't minutes. It was a grueling 4 hours. Just imagine.
Horrifying. And this first attack, it established what you called the dual criminal signature.
Yes. 2 key elements that would repeat. 1, the use of photography during the attack itself, capturing images. 2, the mandate afterward that the victim must shower. That attempt at forensic cleansing. Both were present right from the start with Marie.
Then just 2 months later.
October 2008. He strikes again. This time in Kirkland, Washington, a different nearby town. The victim here was a 63-year-old woman.
And the MO was the same?
Identical in the key aspects. The investigation into this second attack immediately showed the consistency. Specific restraints, the weapon type, the prolonged duration, that post-assault showering compulsion. It all matched the Linwood crime. It solidified the pattern for anyone who might have eventually connected them. Of course, at the time, they weren't connected.
Right. And then he moves. His military orders take him to Colorado in late 2009.
And the Colorado spree begins almost immediately. October 4, 2009, in Aurora, Colorado. His victim there was a 65-year-old grandmother.
Masked assault again.
Yes, masked assault. Bore all the established hallmarks. It confirmed the change in geography did absolutely nothing to alter his core methods or motivations. The predator was just operating in a new hunting ground.
The spree then continues into 2010.
Correct. In July 2010, he targets a 46-year-old artist in Lakewood, Colorado. Now, this one played out slightly differently.
How so?
The victim actually managed to escape. She got out of the house through a bedroom window during the assault. So technically, it became an attempted rape rather than a completed one.
And how did the police initially classify that?
Initially, as a burglary. Which just goes to show how that jurisdictional avoidance tactic could easily cause misclassification. Without the completed sexual assault component front and center, it might look like something else entirely to investigators handling that single incident.
But even with that misclassification, police got a crucial piece of physical evidence from that Lakewood scene, didn't they? A lucky break, almost.
A very lucky break. It yielded a really vital clue. A distinct, high-quality footprint from an Adidas shoe. A specific model, a clear impression, that became physical evidence they could potentially link later.
And they did link it quite quickly, actually.
They did. Just 1 month later, August 2010, he attacks again, this time in Westminster, Colorado. The victim was a 59-year-old woman. Broke in wearing a mask, restrained her hands, raped her. Standard O'Leary M.O.
But the Westminster police.
The Westminster investigators showed some really sharp police work here. They found footprints at this scene, too. And crucially, they were astute enough, or perhaps the database systems were getting better, to connect the distinct characteristics of these footprints directly back to the ones left at the Lakewood scene just weeks before.
That's huge. That's the first internal link across jurisdictions in Colorado. He hadn't counted on that.
Precisely. His tactic of spreading crimes out was starting to fray at the edges, at least within the Denver metro area, but he wasn't caught yet.
No. His final known assault, the one that really proved instrumental in his capture, was January 5, 2011 in Golden, Colorado.
Right. The victim here was a 26-year-old engineering student, and this was another one of those intensely prolonged ordeals. O'Leary spent several hours inside her apartment, repeated rapes, constant terror.
But this victim, despite everything she endured, she gave investigators something incredibly specific.
Her resilience was just remarkable. Amidst that trauma, she observed and remembered a critical physical detail about her attacker, something unique and highly specific. She told investigators he had a distinctive egg-shaped birthmark or tattoo on his lower leg.
An egg-shaped mark. That's specific.
That's specific. That single detail, provided after hours of terror, proved to be the final unique piece of the puzzle. The identifier that would ultimately lead investigators straight to Marc O'Leary.
Okay, now we really need to dig into the mechanics of how he operated. Section 3. Deconstruction of the MO and the fatal signature. This is where that military precision really comes into focus, showing just how organized this guy was.
Yeah, you can really break his methods down into these highly structured phases. Looking at all the evidence collectively, it's clear this wasn't, some random impulse. Each attack was like a mission for him. Planned, rehearsed, executed.
Let's start with phase 1, target selection and surveillance. The planning phase. What's interesting, as you mentioned, is his victimology was really broad, ages 18 to 65. He wasn't zeroing in on one specific type.
That's exactly right. His criteria weren't about demographics like age or appearance. It was purely about vulnerability and opportunity. He deliberately targeted women he had confirmed lived alone.
Why was living alone so key?
Because it minimized the risk of interruption. Remember, his attacks were long, hours long. He needed that quiet confidence, that assurance that no one else was likely to come home unexpectedly to execute the kind of prolonged terror he derived gratification from. Living alone provided that operational security for him.
And the surveillance. The sheer amount of time he put into it is just staggering.
It really is. He admitted dedicating hundreds of hours to it, weeks, sometimes maybe even months, spent just stalking potential targets, learning their precise routines, their work schedules, when they came and went, who visited, just mapping out their lives.
Often from his truck, right? That specific 1993 Mazda pickup.
Yes, that vehicle became almost part of his toolkit. It provided relative anonymity, a mobile observation post where he could watch undetected for long periods.
But the surveillance, it went beyond just watching from the curb, didn't it? This is where the military training seems to come back in.
Absolutely. This wasn't just passive observation. It was active criminal reconnaissance. He conducted multiple test runs. This is key. He would covertly enter the target's home multiple times before the actual assault.
What? He'd break in beforehand just to look around?
Exactly. He was learning the floor plan, identifying potential obstacles, escape routes, checking where every lock, every window was, confirming the victim's schedule from inside their own space. He was essentially running an infiltration assessment, like a military planner assessing a target building, but on a random civilian home.
That level of preparation is chilling. It ensures that when he moves to phase 2, the intrusion and attack sequence, the control phase, he's not fumbling. He knows the environment.
Precisely. He's confident, efficient. He typically exploited unsecured points. An open window was common, sometimes an unlocked door. Opportunistic, but informed by his prior recon. And control was instant.
Mask, weapon.
always a mask for anonymity, always a weapon, usually a knife, for immediate, overwhelming intimidation. His subdual methods involved restraints, often pragmatically using whatever was readily available in the victim's home, like we saw with Marie's shoelaces or other garments. It shows a chilling resourcefulness under pressure.
And we have to keep hammering this point home because it ties back directly to his core motivation. These were not quick, impulsive acts.
Not at all. The assaults consistently lasted for several hours. This wasn't incidental, it was integral to the crime. The prolonged duration was designed specifically to maximize and extend the victim's terror, because that was the source of his gratification.
But within this phase of calculated control, there was something else going on, something ritualistic, the signature behavior.
Yes, the behavior that served no practical criminal purpose didn't help him escape, didn't make the crime easier, but clearly fulfilled a deep-seated psychological need. He arrives prepared. He brought a kit with him.
Okay, tell us about the kit. Because these details are so specific, so bizarre, they really define his unique signature.
The kit, based on victim accounts and evidence found later, included things like thigh-high stockings, lubrication, moist towelettes, standard items maybe in some contexts. But then there was the truly distinctive element.
The shoes.
The shoes. Clear, plastic high heels with pink ribbons. He forced his victims to wear these items during the assault, along with the stockings.
Why? What purpose did that serve?
From a practical standpoint, none whatsoever. It didn't aid in the assault, didn't help him avoid detection. This was purely about fulfilling a private, highly specific sexual fantasy. It was entirely for him. And that makes it the undeniable core psychological marker, the signature of Marc O'Leary's crimes. It screamed him.
Which brings us perfectly to phase 3. Countermeasures versus psychological trophy-taking. This is where the whole paradox just smacks you in the face. On one hand, he's incredibly forensically aware.
Brilliant, almost, from a criminal perspective. He consistently wore latex gloves, basic but crucial. He took items away from the scene that could potentially hold his DNA, things like the victim's sheets, bedding, maybe even clothing. He understood fiber transfer, fluid transfer.
And the showering. That was the most consistent, most sophisticated tactic.
Present in every single crime. Forcing the victim to shower, wash thoroughly, and in that one instance with the golden student, even brush their teeth immediately after the assault. This was a deliberate, educated attempt to destroy any trace DNA evidence he might have left behind. He knew police relied heavily on biological samples from rape kits. He was actively trying to neutralize that entire avenue of investigation.
So by every objective measure, he was a masterful forensic countermeasure technician. He knew what he was doing to avoid physical detection.
Absolutely. And yet, at the exact same time, he was actively creating the very evidence that would nail him, his own worst enemy. That psychological compulsion was his fatal flaw.
The pink Sony digital camera again?
That camera. He used it to take numerous photographs during each and every assault, capturing the victims in states of terror and helplessness, often wearing those signature items.
And these photos, they served a dual purpose for him, didn't they?
They did. First, they were pure psychological trophies. He kept them, reportedly in stacks, in his closet. Why? So he could relive the assaults, revisit the fear he had manufactured, feed that core motivation.
But also as a weapon.
Also as a weapon, post-defense control. He explicitly threatened victims, telling them he would publish the photos online if they ever reported the crime to the police. It was a way to extend his power and control long after he'd physically left the scene, keep them silent through fear and shame.
It's just astounding. The rational MO, the meticulous forensic hygiene that successfully eliminated DNA traces in many instances, completely undermined by this irrational, compulsive, psychological signature.
Totally. The digital evidence, created purely for his own gratification and control, became the fatal flaw, the undeniable proof of his guilt. It rendered all his careful planning, all his forensic countermeasures, ultimately worthless. And the way these contrasting elements, O'Leary's careful planning versus his fatal flaw, and then the police response played out, is really highlighted in Section 4, The Tale of Two Investigations. It's just a stark study in contrasts. You see exactly how institutional bias can fail victims and let a predator roam free.
Versus how trust, collaboration, and good police work can bring them to justice. Let's start with the really difficult part. Part A, systemic failure in Washington, the case of Marie.
Right. So Marie reports this horrific 4-hour ordeal in Linwood back in August 2008. The response from the Linwood Police Department detectives assigned Sergeant Jeffrey Mason and Jerry Rickgarn. Well, it was immediate and overwhelming skepticism.
He just didn't believe her from the start.
It appears that way. Their entire investigative approach seemed fundamentally flawed from the outset. They didn't prioritize the objective evidence available. She had physical marks consistent with being bound. Her story detailed a very specific MO. But they didn't focus on that.
What did they focus on?
They focused on her, on perceived minor inconsistencies in her narrative recall, which, by the way, are almost universally expected in trauma survivors trying to recount horrific events. Memory isn't linear after trauma.
And her demeanor, right? They had issues with how she acted.
Yes, and this is perhaps the most damning part. They cited her perceived lack of emotional expressiveness. They expected tears, hysteria maybe, and when they didn't get the reaction they anticipated, they interpreted it as deception.
Which is just textbook investigative bias, completely failing to understand common trauma responses like shock, dissociation, or a flat affect.
Exactly. Instead of investigating the crime she reported, they essentially turned the investigation onto her. External reviews later confirmed their tactics were aggressive, described as bullying, hounding, and coercive.
Threatening her.
Yes. They threatened her with losing her spot in transitional housing, making her homeless. And the ultimate threat. They told her she could face jail time herself if she failed a polygraph test.
Polygraphs, which are notoriously unreliable, especially under duress.
Precisely. So under this immense psychological pressure, imagine being 18, traumatized, and now facing homelessness and jail from the very people supposed to help you. Marie tragically recanted her true statement. She falsely confessed to making the whole thing up.
Oh, that's just heartbreaking.
It is, and the system processed it. In March 2009, Marie pleaded guilty to a gross misdemeanor charge of filing a false police report. She was fined $500. The system punished the victim.
And this wasn't just a one-off bad interaction, was it? There was a larger context in Linwood PD.
The institutional context is crucial here. Sources reveal that during that period, roughly 2008 to 2012, the Linwood Police Department classified an astonishing 21.3% of all reported rapes as unfounded.
Unfounded meaning they decided no crime actually happened.
Correct. They essentially dismissed 1 in 5 rape reports as false or baseless. That figure was 5 times the national average for unfounded rates during the same period.
Wow. That points to a deep systemic issue, doesn't it? A bias baked into the department's culture.
It strongly suggests a systemic bias that prioritized maybe clearing cases easily or investigator skepticism over believing victims and thoroughly reviewing evidence. And the consequence.
O'Leary walked away clean from Washington.
Walked away clean, unidentified, unpressured, free to relocate to Colorado and continue his predatory attacks for nearly 3 more years. That failure had devastating consequences.
Which makes the contrast with Part B methodical success in Colorado all the more striking.
Absolutely. The tide only turned thanks to good police work, communication, and trust down in Colorado.
So the breakthrough moment came after that final attack in Golden, January 2011.
Yes. It started somewhat organically, which often happens in these complex cases. Detective Stacy Galbraith of the Golden Police Department was reviewing the case details that very specific MO, the prolonged assault, the ritualistic elements like the pink heels, and crucially, that victim's description of the unique egg-shaped mark on the attacker's lower leg.
And she talked about it with her husband.
Yeah, her husband was also a police officer in a neighboring jurisdiction. She was discussing these really unique, almost bizarre details with him.
And he recognized something.
He did. He recognized those specific ritualistic details. Maybe the pink heels, the prolonged nature-matched aspects of cases his colleague, Detective Edna Hendershot, over at the Westminster PD, had been working on.
That informal conversation was the spark.
It was the spark that connected the dots. That high-trust conversation immediately linked the Golden case, the Westminster case, where Hendershot worked, and by extension, the earlier Lakewood case, because Westminster had already linked their footprints to Lakewood. Suddenly, they knew they weren't dealing with isolated incidents. They were dealing with a single, active, serial offender operating across their jurisdictions.
And their response was immediate, right? No sitting on it.
Immediate. They didn't waste any time. They formed a dedicated multi-agency task force, pulled in resources from all the affected local departments, Golden, Westminster, Lakewood, Aurora, and crucially, brought in the FBI for their expertise and resources.
And their fundamental approach was just completely different from what happened in Washington.
Night and day. Their strategy was evidence first. They started with the facts, the patterns, the behavioral residue O'Leary was leaving behind. Rather than starting with a preconceived theory about the victim or the crime, they let the evidence lead them.
And the evidence gathering was just methodical, piece by piece.
Methodical and brilliant, really. 3 critical leads emerged that, when combined, basically made O'Leary's capture inevitable.
Okay, what were they?
Lead number 1. The physical evidence They already had that distinct Adidas shoe footprint. That was the thread linking the Lakewood and Westminster scenes. Just solid forensic police work initially connecting those two.
Lead number 2.
The surveillance lead. Remember O'Leary's truck? That 1993 Mazda pickup he used for all that stalking. A vigilant citizen near the Golden Victims apartment complex reported seeing that specific type of truck lurking around repeatedly in the days leading up to the attack. They thought it was suspicious.
Good on that citizen.
Absolutely. That tip, combined with checking local surveillance footage, maybe from businesses or traffic cams near the scene, allowed the task force to eventually capture an image of the truck and get a clear license plate number.
Which led them directly to
Marc Patrick O'Leary. Now they had a name, a potential suspect.
and the third lead, the DNA confirmation.
Yes, the DNA link. This showcases the more advanced strategic capabilities of the task force, especially with FBI involvement. Once O'Leary was firmly on their radar as the prime suspect based on the truck and the MO links, they needed to tie him forensically to the scenes where DNA was recovered. Despite his cleaning efforts, some trace DNA was found at 3 Colorado scenes.
How did they do that without alerting him?
Covertly. The FBI collected a DNA sample from O'Leary's brother. It's a standard technique obtained DNA from a close relative to establish a familial link.
And the lab analysis.
The analysis confirmed it. The DNA profile recovered from those 3 Colorado crime scenes belonged to a close paternal relative of the brother whose sample they'd collected. This narrowed the focus scientifically and definitively onto Marc O'Leary himself. They had him.
It really is just a perfect teaching case, isn't it? The contrast. Colorado succeeds by trusting the behavioral patterns, collaborating seamlessly across agencies, and following the evidence trail wherever it led.
While Linwood failed, tragically, because they chose to ignore the victim's testimony, dismiss critical MO details, and allowed personal skepticism, or perhaps institutional bias, to override the evidence right in front of them.
So that methodical, collaborative, evidence-based work in Colorado inevitably led to his arrest and the final stages of the case. Section 5. Adjudication and enduring legacy. It's a powerful conclusion, especially for the victims.
It absolutely is. O'Leary was arrested on February 13, 2011, in Lakewood, Colorado, and the search of his residence immediately following the arrest. It was just decisive. The evidence wasn't subtle, it was overwhelming. Irrefutable proof that his psychological signature truly was his undoing.
How long did the search take? What did they find?
It was an intensive 12-hour search of his home. They found a pistol consistent with weapon descriptions. They found, crucially, the pink Sony digital camera he used. They found various physical items that could be considered trophies taken from victims. But the absolute definitive proof, the smoking gun, it was found in his closet.
The photos.
Stacks and stacks of digital photographs, images of his victims, bound, gagged, clearly terrified, the physical manifestation of his psychological need, and the irony, we have to say it again, it's just profound. He dedicated all that planning, all that military home discipline to meticulously eliminating DNA, the physical evidence most criminals fear leaving behind.
Yeah, the stuff CSI focuses on.
Exactly. And yet he was utterly incapable, psychologically, of discarding the digital evidence, the photos, which in the end were far more damning, far more powerful, far more uniquely identifying than any stray hair or skin cell could ever be.
And critically, amongst those hundreds, maybe thousands of images, they found photos of Murray.
Yes. The investigators found photographs clearly taken during the 2008 Linwood attack, photos showing Marie in restraints during the assault, and perhaps most critically, one image was an extremely clear shot of her learner's permit.
Her ID.
Her ID. Right there, in a photo documenting the crime she had reported years earlier. That single piece of digital evidence provided absolute, undeniable proof of her identity, linking O'Leary directly to that specific crime. It completely vindicated her original report.
It shattered his ability to deny anything, didn't it? It connected the Washington crimes directly to the Colorado ones through his own actions.
Completely shattered it. Faced with this mountain of photographic evidence, physical trophies, the camera itself, O'Leary's initial attempts to feign innocence just evaporated. He had no choice.
So he pleaded guilty.
Yes. In October 2011, he entered a guilty plea in Colorado to 28 felony counts. Covered the range of his crimes there, multiple counts of sexual assault, kidnapping, burglary, stalking.
And the sentencing.
Came in December 2011. The judge handed down the maximum possible sentence allowable under Colorado law at the time. 327.5 years in prison just for the Colorado crimes.
327.5 years.
Plus an additional 68.5 years to be served concurrently for the Washington crimes, including the Kirkland attack. Essentially, multiple life sentences. He is incarcerated with absolutely no possibility of parole. Justice, in terms of punishment, was absolute.
And for Marie, what did this mean for her legally?
It meant complete exoneration. The conclusion of the criminal case against O'Leary, with the photographic proof of her assault, led directly to the official overturning of her wrongful 2009 conviction for filing a false report.
So her name was cleared.
Completely cleared. The conviction was formally vacated. She received a refund for that $500 fine she'd been forced to pay. She got a formal public apology from the Linwood Police Department for how they treated her. And eventually, she also reached a civil settlement with the city of Linwood for $150,000, acknowledging their negligence.
Some measure of justice, at least.
Some measure, yes.
Yeah.
But the impact of the case went far beyond the courtroom walls.
Yeah, the story blew up, didn't it?
It really did. The combination of O'Leary's meticulous crimes, the horrific details, but especially that systemic failure in Washington. The story of Marie being disbelieved captured public attention. It became the subject of incredible journalism.
The Pulitzer Prize-winning article.
Exactly. A piece by ProPublica and the Marshall Project in 2015 titled An Unbelievable Story of Rape won the Pulitzer for explanatory reporting. And that article, in turn, was adapted into the hugely successful 2019 Netflix miniseries, Unbelievable.
Which brought the story to a massive global audience.
Millions of people. And that massive cultural amplification did something really important. It transformed this specific tragic case into a catalyst for a global conversation.
About how police handle these cases.
Precisely. It forced police departments, legal systems, policymakers, and the public everywhere to confront the devastating real-world consequences of investigative bias, of not believing victims, of not understanding trauma. And it really mandated, or at least heavily pushed for, the critical implementation of trauma-informed policing practices when investigating sexual violence cases worldwide. That's its enduring legacy.
So we started this deep dive focused on that central paradox of Marc O'Leary, the meticulous planner undone by his own psychology, and that really is the core takeaway, isn't it?
It is. We analyze this highly disciplined, military-trained predator, someone who could successfully deploy advanced forensic hygiene tactics, consciously trying to beat the system by eliminating DNA evidence.
And yet,
he was psychologically compulsively incapable of discarding the digital record. The photos that documented the very terror he derived his pleasure from, that need for proof, for trophies, overrode the rational plan for evasion.
And the human cost of that initial failure in Linwood. It's hard to overstate. That institutional skepticism didn't just harm Marie, it allowed O'Leary to remain active, unidentified, causing profound harm to other women for nearly 3 more years.
It's a stark reminder of the responsibility investigators hold. And it makes the work of Detectives Galbraith and Hendershot in Colorado stand out even more. They chose to prioritize the victim's narrative, to trust the patterns in the behavioral evidence, and to collaborate. That's what broke the case.
The lasting truth here seems to be that the story an offender tells, maybe unintentionally, through their consistent, repetitive signature behaviors. The rituals, the compulsions, the psychological needs, like trophy-taking, that story can actually be far more reliable and ultimately less deniable than any physical trace evidence they try to scrub away.
The digital ghost of the crime, born from his psychology, became the irrefutable proof that his meticulous cleaning couldn't erase.
So, the provocative thought we want to leave you with today is this. Given cases like O'Leary's, where the offender's most enduring, most reliable evidence turns out to be his psychological signature, that compulsive flaw, does the justice system need to adjust how it thinks about irrefutable proof?
Should consistent behavioral analysis, pattern recognition, maybe even the victim's detailed account of those signature elements be given potentially even more weight than the physical evidence alone, which we know can be manipulated or destroyed?
And if so, how do we better train investigators not just to collect physical evidence, but to truly listen, to trust the victim's story as the primary map leading to that unique, often undeniable, psychological signature?
Something for all of us to consider as we think about how to better pursue justice in these incredibly complex cases.